enough to be able to do the things that are going to make our communities, our state, and by extension our country that much stronger. And we can't just talk about it, we've got to lead by example. And so Amy was doing some Wikipedia research on Childress earlier, and she said in the not too distant past, this town was ranked 9th in the country in terms of most conservative communities in America. It may be glowing so red you can see it from outer space as the space station orbits doesn't matter, right? We got to show up and listen to and learn from and choose to work with everyone. It's the only way we're going to move forward. And I also think it offers the perfect contrast to those who are in power right now, who really want to define us by our differences and make us scared of one another or the people who are coming to get us, allegedly. And I don't know that we're ever at our best when we're afraid, when we're acting out of fear, when we're walling ourselves off from one another. I think we're always reaching our true potential when we see each other not as the enemy, but as the opportunity to do better for ourselves and for everyone else. And so in our public schools, instead of trying to figure out what books we're going to ban or to scare parents about transgender students using the bathroom in their kids' middle school, what if we focused on paying school teachers enough so that they didn't have to work a second or a third job, showing them the respect they deserve given the fact that they have one of the most important jobs that we can imagine in our communities? What if we listen to them about how we do a better job on testing and accountability and what the needs are for their kids, both for instruction and academics, but also just how they're doing, their social and emotional well-being, as we call it. You know, are they okay? And do they have what they need to be able to make it in life and to contribute back to all of us once they graduate? I want to make sure that we do that as governor. Instead of trying to take kids from their families, why don't we try to help those children stay within their families or help those kids in the foster care system, 30,000 of them in a system that is badly underfunded, where we've learned that 23 kids have died in the custody and care of the state of Texas just in the last 2 years. And the situation has gotten, in the words of a district court judge, it's gone from bad to worse right now in the state of Texas. Let's invest there and help the most vulnerable among us. And where possible, keep them in their homes or at least with their families by assisting everyone in that household to be able to do better. It's a great idea that can bring us together as well. And then this last one. In this state that prides itself on those who've served our country in uniform, those who swore an oath not to a person or to a political party, but to the Constitution, our form of government, our ability to elect those who represent and reflect our views. Let's make sure that this state actually is a democracy and that people can freely and fairly have a voice in their government, have their vote counted, and even cast a ballot to begin with. This is now the hardest state in the nation in which to participate in our politics. We're seeing early vote by mail ballot rejection rates that are breaking every record that has ever been set in this country, and it's not a record that we want to hold here in the state of Texas. The best way for us to overcome this now, before this election takes place, is to get out there and meet our fellow Texans where they are, assume nothing about them based on who they voted for president or any other difference between us. Find out if they want to come together on these issues that matter to all of us. Jobs, great schools, the ability to see a doctor because we have expanded Medicaid in this state. That's what it's going to take to overcome voter suppression and voter intimidation. That's what it's going to take to win this race. And that's what it's going to take for us to fully realize who we are as Texans and get back to doing the big, bold things that we used to be known for. So with that, I wanted to bring my comments to a close and then ask if it's okay with Grace and Tex, for any of you who have a question or a comment or a suggestion or an idea or something you want me to know about Childress, besides the fact that it was the 9th most conservative city in the United States of America. There's more to the story here. I want you to share that with me, and I'm all ears. And Henry, how did I do on timing? Pretty good? Pretty good. Okay, we want to make sure that we leave enough time for everyone to have a say. Yes,
so
ma'am.
After the last legislative session that yielded this array of bills that I personally didn't agree with any of it, I'm very upset about that, but okay, well, we'll put that aside because we don't have anything to say about it for 2 years in this state. But what was not dealt with at all was was the grid. And we really suffered here. And we had people die in this community. We had people who had busted, overflowing water in their house and no help, no FEMA, no squat. And now we have we've seen some telephone poles go up. We've seen some lines extended. So that's better, you know, but it's nothing like what it should be. And then the second thing is, your staff or you need to spend some significant time in the Panhandle. We're not East Texas, we're the Panhandle Plains. And between Childress, Lubbock, Amarillo, many of these small towns, look at the devastation. Go through Memphis if you have time. The whole town had experienced a really bad fire recently. And so there's a lot of neglect, political and governance neglect, and powerful ag, powerful cattle. But the regular, everyday little people, look at the stats for the elementary school. This is not a community of wealthy young families, and I don't see any young families here except this lady. I've seen her at the elementary school with her young children. So the power grid is really what I think is the most immediate need, and infrastructure like power, water, infrastructure like internet. Yeah.
So I'm glad that you brought this up, because it's really important that we remember that the grid didn't fail because it got cold. It didn't fail because of the weather or Mother Nature or God or any other reason than those who were in power at the time, including our governor, Greg Abbott, chose not to require the weatherization and winterization of the grid, and importantly, the gas supply, which literally froze while temperatures were plummeting in the state of Texas. But what's even worse is after hundreds lost their lives, and I'm sorry for those who lost loved ones here in Childress, after we sustained tens of billions of dollars in damage throughout this state, the governor still has not done anything to weatherize and winterize the gas supply, which means that when we have, and we will at some point, have severe and extreme weather again, we will not be able to generate the capacity necessary to keep the lights on and the heat running and the water flowing. And so once again, the pipes will freeze and then burst and destroy the property. And in some cases, we'll lose the lives of those in our lives in the state of Texas. What we should have done last legislative session, and what I will do as governor in our first legislative session, is winterize the gas supply. Connect ERCOT, our grid, with the national grid so we can draw down power when we need it, send it back up when we have more than we need, and make a profit on that and invest that back into our infrastructure. And then make sure that we have a cop on the beat, an independent market monitor, to prevent these big corporations that are out of control from taking profits in the billions of dollars while people were freezing. They charged 200 times the going rate for fuel during those 5 days in February when people were literally freezing to death
And our
in their
local
homes.
senator to the state of Texas, his name is Charles Perry, said he don't feel bad for them because they made the wrong choice. You should look at Washington State and the way that they regulate utilities. And if you're up against the legislature that you are gonna be up against, since you're not king, how are you going to get these changes implemented?
It's interesting. One of the things that I want to do, I think we all want to do, is that $11 billion in illegal profits that were made by these corporations and by folks who are already billionaires. That was our money, and it was illegally stolen from us. There's a statute, the Deceptive Trade Practices Act. It specifically prohibits price gouging on those things that keep us alive, like fuel, during a declared disaster. None other than Dan Patrick, a very conservative lieutenant governor, has said that we should get that money back. I actually think there's some common ground here, because people have been harmed, they've been killed, and you and I and all of us are now paying higher utility bills as a cost and consequence of that. Instead of getting that $11 billion back, our governor let those who stole it keep it, and then asked all of us to pay $45 a month more every single month for the next 20 years to make up the difference. That is so wrong, and we've got to get that money back and return it to you and other ratepayers, and then we've got to make that investment in infrastructure. And your second point is related to that, which is these corporations, whether it's the gas company CEOs, these huge agricultural organizations, the huge slaughterhouse corporations, they have monopolies functionally in so many parts of the state, and they have extraordinary power in our politics. They purchase access, influence, and outcomes with those who are in positions of public trust in this state, and we've gotten predictable outcomes and results from it. Hospital closures throughout rural Texas, as an example. Farmers, we just met one at our last stop in Vernon, who said, I just can't compete anymore. I'm just a small independent farmer going up against these corporations. I need someone who's gonna fight for me and be in my corner. He said, that's why I've come out to listen to you. And he's, like many people who are there, a Republican or an independent, who's gonna take a chance on someone who, despite their party, is gonna make that different change that we need in this state. So we really need to come together, and I will take you up on your offer to keep coming back to Childress, which is how I interpreted what you just said, and to be visiting more.
Come to my house for dinner if you want.
Even better. And it's why we're here right now. But we can't take anyone for granted. We can't write anybody off. We got to be able to work with everyone and connect the dots on these issues as you just did. So thank you. Thanks for that question.
This is sort of on the national scene, but the Ukraine situation has brought Democrats and Republicans together. Do you think that togetherness will filter down?
I sure hope so. You know, they say, or they used to say, that politics ends at the water's edge, and when we have an international crisis where we may, you know, who knows what Putin will do, and if he threatens a NATO country and in fact invades one, that triggers, you know, Article 5 within that treaty, and then it's our young women and men from communities like these who will be fighting in that battle. So we want the president, whoever that president is in a time of war, potential war, to be successful. We all want to get behind them. And we want to make sure that we're doing everything we can to avert war. And that's going to take this country coming together and being unified. And like you, I'm seeing some signs of that nationally. I would love for that to be reflected here in the state of Texas. We actually have a potentially great role to play as we try to help Europe free itself from dependence on Russian energy. We're producing a lot of that energy right here, and it could be the liquefied natural gas that is produced here in Texas that is a lifeline for those European countries who are being held hostage by Putin right now. That should be a source of pride for all of us. But Grace, the other thing that I think about when I compare what's happening to Ukraine to this country is you really have a war on democracy right now. You have an autocrat in Putin invading a democracy and trying to compel them through violence to do what they otherwise would never choose to do. In Texas, we have a real threat on democracy right now. And we really have a question, I think, nationally about whether we are going to maintain this form of government or descend into something else altogether. And the front line in this is this state, and it's this moment right now. And we've got to step up to that challenge, and we cannot be found wanting. And so that's the reason that I think we're coming together in such great numbers right now. So many people volunteering to knock on doors and to make this democracy work, because it is under attack all over the world, and certainly here in Texas right now too.
Thank you.
Thanks for asking. Yeah. Yes.
Hello. I just wanted to say, you know, I'm incoming chair in Collingsworth County. My friend that's the chair is out of town, so he couldn't be here tonight, but Collingsworth County is like 86% Republican, and we didn't have a Democratic chair for 10 or 15 years, I think. It's been a long time. But after your campaign in 2018, a lot of us organized and got motivated to do something on the local level. I was just wondering, how do you plan to address all these small rural communities? We have a lot of differences in terms of like what our needs are, and it's really hard. It feels like we're fighting a losing battle against the majority in our areas. That's really hard for us to deal with. So I know that's going to be an issue for you as well to overcome. How do you plan to address that?
Help me in doing this. It's like what you just said about making sure that we come back to the Panhandle and to Childress more often. Amy can tell you at every event that we've been at today, starting in Weatherford and then Alney and then in Vernon just now, people have come up to us and they've said, you know what, my girlfriend dragged me here, I'm a Republican, I didn't think I was into you at all, I didn't, you know, or don't like politics, or I would never vote for a Democrat. but I just heard what you said about jobs and schools. My girlfriend's a school teacher, and it sounds like you have her back, and expanding Medicaid. That makes sense to me. I'm for you. But we can forgive people who don't make those connections if we don't show up for them in the first place.
Sure.
And tell them what we're about, because otherwise other people are going to define us, right?
And that's so hard to combat.
And it's so
just
hard.
so hard.
So help me. I mean, we want to support what you're doing. You connect us with those people who, we can't just preach to the choir.
Right.
Or listen to the converted. We have to be an organization that is interested in converts and not rooting out heretics, right? We are for everyone, Democrat, Republican, Independent, and we've got to show that. So you'll know the people in your community who may not be for us right now, but may be open to listening to us and having a conversation and coming away from that and saying, you know what? Here I live in a rural community. My hospital's closed down under Abbott. We haven't taken Medicaid expansion. Our teachers are making $10,000 less than they are nationally. He vetoed the Universal Service Fund, which means that my telephone and internet bills have gone up if I can get online, because half of rural Texas cannot access the internet effectively right now. I know that we can do better. And you can also be that messenger and that validator, but we want to have your back as well. And so if you can find a way, either for us to come and visit you the way that we're doing today, or even through Zoom and other means, connecting with the people in your community. And if you could lead the volunteer effort to be at people's doors, we would love that. I know Cynthia Cano, who's leading our effort and is right behind you, would love to make sure we get your information before we leave so that we can follow up on that.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for being here.
Of course.
Other questions, comments, suggestions? Yes, sir.
This last, I guess, session, we took a whooping on this gerrymandering. You know, it's gotten worse. How would you fix that? I mean, it's gotten worse.
I think everyone can get the injustice of members of Congress choosing their voters instead of the other way around, right? And Republicans do it for sure. Democrats do it as well. Those in power are tempted to do whatever they can to keep power. I think it's just human nature. I don't think it's the purview of one party or another. The best fix to that, I believe, is an independent, nonpartisan redistricting commission where you're invited to the table, but I am not. You don't want politicians drawing the lines. You want people in a given community saying, you know what, these boundaries make sense to me. This is my community, and the representative will have a clear idea of our needs based on these lines versus some of these lines that you see in some congressional districts that extend from Austin all the way to Houston, this narrow strip of I-35, and it is so cynical and calculated to keep the current representative in power, and it can be functionally disenfranchising. People just say, you know what, I give up. And it's not just that. A 3-judge federal panel in 2017, 2 of those judges appointed by Republicans described our congressional districts as a racial gerrymander because they so effectively drew out people of color from political power in those districts. So we've got to get to an independent redistricting commission. That would be my ideal, and I want to work with the legislature. There is a lot of Republican support as well as Democratic support. I think term limits would do a world of good, because if you can stay there 30 years because you've drawn your own district and there's no way to unseat you, then how are we going to get the diversity and the talent in your community reflected in that position of public trust? And then democracy reforms. Make election day a holiday, for example, so people have time off of work, or automatic voter registration. You turn 18, you're a citizen, you're on the rolls. Making sure that we can register to vote online. This is one of the last states that requires you to do it in person and on paper. And in the year 2022, that's crazy. So there are some common sense things we can do to get this democracy back, but we first got to win this race. And the way to do that, again, I think is going to be talking to people and having these conversations door to door, community to community. So appreciate you being here with us today. Any other questions? Yeah.
What's your views on the legalization of marijuana? I mean, I'm not a pothead. I don't know. I'm just curious because the tax dollars is good off of that, you know?
And I agree with you. So yes, we should legalize it. There are any number of reasons to do it. And some of the most compelling that I've heard as I've traveled the state are from veterans who say, look, I came back from Vietnam with post-traumatic stress disorder or symptoms of traumatic brain injury, and they'll prescribe me an opioid, which is legal. to which I can become addicted and from which I might die, as have tens of thousands of Americans. But if I try to use marijuana, which relieves my symptoms better than anything else, I'm a criminal in the eyes of the law in the state of Texas. That makes no sense at all, especially when you consider most of the other states in the union have already legalized marijuana. So why are we still putting people behind bars for possession of a substance that is free to use in other states? So yes, I want to make sure we legalize it. We would save $500 million a year on incarceration and interdiction and law enforcement costs. We'd make another $500 million in taxation, as other states have done. And it would be a lot smarter and wiser use of public resources to do that.
People are doing it anyway.
That's right.
I mean-
And do you want them doing it in the black market? Our son is about to enter middle school. Middle schools are one of the fastest growing markets for marijuana sales in states that have not made it legal. The reason being, in a black market and with a drug dealer, they don't care your age, they're not gonna ID you, there are no safeguards or protections. And so like you, I would say, and as a parent of a 15, 13, and 11-year-old, we don't want our kids touching that stuff. We're gonna have a better chance of keeping it away if it is regulated in the state of Texas than if anybody can get their hands on it, which is the case right now. So there are a lot of good reasons to do this, and I think this is another issue where it's not just Democrats, it's Republicans, it's independents. People of Texas know that it's time, and you don't have to be someone who wants to use it in order to realize that this is something that should be legal in the state. Thanks for asking that question, appreciate it.
I have another question.
Yeah, come on.
How familiar are you with what happened here over the winter with COVID deaths and the hospitals? And the last time I talked to my doctor, he said, we can't sustain this anymore. And you know what I'm talking about, I think, probably. The healthcare system
Yeah.
is breaking.
That's right. So my sister, when the COVID pandemic started, was an emergency room nurse. And listening to her and so many other nurses that I've talked to across the state, and young women and men who graduate from this institution right here, they are beyond the breaking point, and they are starting to leave the profession in alarming numbers. And we were just listening to some nurses who said, at the beginning of the pandemic, it was thank you, and now this job is thankless.
People yell at them.
They yell at them,
Every day.
awful things that have happened to them, and they're literally on the front lines and losing their lives at an alarming rate for having this dedication of public service that we should all be grateful for. We estimate about 20,000 nurses short in the state of Texas, and it's because we make it so hostile to practice medicine here and to take on that position. As governor, we've got a plan to add 7,500 new nurses per year by making sure that we help to underwrite their education so they're not taking on tens of thousands of dollars in debt in order to do this. We want to make sure that they are paid a fair wage and that they're treated with the respect that they've earned and that they deserve. And then you're right to point to the larger medical system in the state of Texas. When you're the least insured state in the country, when you have failed to expand Medicaid, you have a lot of people who don't have the ability to pay but still need health care. And that is a stressor not just on healthcare professionals, but all of us as property taxpayers who end up footing the bill for uncompensated care in our hospitals. It's another reason that expanding Medicaid is just such a no-brainer for Texas. The feds pay 90 cents on the dollar. We come up with 10 cents, and we get more doctors, more nurses, more mental health care providers in a state where the largest provider of mental health care services today is the county jail system. It's a really immoral, inefficient, and expensive way to deliver the care that people need. So I appreciate you pointing that out, because we can and should do so much better. And again, this is one where people are on the same page about the priority and the wisdom in making some of these smart, common sense decisions, like expanding Medicaid.
But are you aware that, and that's really good for the whole of the state, but here, what I saw was hospitals that were open but had to call 30 different facilities and still couldn't get their most ill patients transported. And then the numbers went way up, and the numbers went way up at the prison, which causes a community flare of the illness. And COVID is coming again, there's another variant that's been detected, hopefully we won't see it again. But when we have a pandemic as an example, we don't want to expand hospital beds to address a pandemic. But when I was in Washington, that was when COVID started, and I was in Seattle. And they built tent care facilities that were not permanent. And I saw none of that here. Probably there's reasons. But it just seems like there's not enough money to address big problems like that, but also dental care in our community and all of those things that the people who don't have something will never get. So, you know, it's familiarity with this particular area as well. I think we're a lot worse off than West Texas, certainly.
I appreciate you sharing that with me, and you're right.
Yeah, there's a lack of oil money.
Yeah, we want to know what the unique specific needs are here so that we can deliver for them. So just your sharing that with me is really, really helpful. I'll tell you, in El Paso, we also had demand that outstripped capacity in our hospitals. We did end up setting up, tent hospitals outside of our public hospital. And sadly, we had to set up 10 mobile morgues in the city of El Paso because so many people
Amarillo did
died
that.
so quickly. Amarillo did that as well?
Yeah.
Yeah, the Panhandle, the border communities of South Texas and El Paso were the hardest hit in the state of Texas. This did not affect every part of the state equally.
That's interesting.
Yeah, so, yes.
Talking about extended Medicaid is it's a no-brainer. It's a no-brainer for people that have searched into, background of it. Most people, because here in this community, I've been with the health marketplace since 2013, so I'm familiar with it. We farm and ranch. I quit my job at the state, so it was perfect timing at that time that Obama they were able to pass that. So many people in this community, because every year I put on our little Childress Best page, it's time to sign up. I'll help you if you can, because our area doesn't have that. I mean, I've even had people at the hospital reach out to me. Hey, I need help signing people up. My sister lives in Washington County. She was mentioning Washington. They have outreach where they reach out to you.
To get information.
They
in
have
the
free
mail.
places within the community for you to go to, rather than you're searching or, we have a lot of Hispanics, I'm Hispanic, that have died in this community, and it was because they didn't have health insurance, so they were scared to go in there. It's a no-brainer for people that are being told the truth. I think a lot of people don't have any idea when I say Texas didn't extend Medicaid, I'm sorry, I can't help you. And that's a shame, because if they would go and vote, or if they would, if more people knew that that was an incentive, that's a huge paycheck incentive to go and vote for your interests that make you save money and save lives. And so many people in this community and small communities have no idea that if they would go vote, everybody that didn't have health insurance would have it available to them.
Such a great point. I got to tell you, going back to meeting the county commissioner, that's a conversation I would love to have with him. And he's got that responsibility for public health at the county level and the county jail, and so many places where we're delivering health care at a far more expensive, inefficient way with worse outcomes for people, because it's not as though someone who doesn't have insurance, who gets really sick, isn't going to take health care. They are, but it's going to be more expensive by the time they get there, because they haven't had any preventative care. They haven't been treated. They haven't been able to afford medication. We can save Childress a lot of money by expanding Medicaid. We can return that money to the local taxpayer, or invest it into schools, or whatever our other priorities are. But you're right, we can't assume anything about anyone knowing that. We have to be willing to share that with people, ask them what they would rather prefer. If there's another way to get people covered, I'm open to it. But Medicaid, which, as you know, was signed into law by our fellow Texan LBJ in 1965, we created the program right here. You and I are paying in federal taxes to expand it, but we're receiving none of the benefit back in the state of Texas. It's galling to me. And the Republican governor of Arkansas, our border state, expanded it. Louisiana, they may have had a Democrat governorship at the time, expanded it. Oklahoma expanded it with a Republican in the governorship. New Mexico at the time with the Republican governor expanded it. There's no good reason, partisan or otherwise, not to do the right thing. And any time is a good time to finally get it right. And look, we'd hope that Greg Abbott would do it. He may have painted himself in a corner on this one. It's another reason, another case that we can make for why we need change right now. And you're right, it's gonna take people in this community seeing that in their own self-interest and voting that way. So in the same way that you're helping people connect with the Affordable Care Act and the subsidy that allows them to afford insurance, I hope that you'll also help connect them with this campaign and the opportunity to do something that's gonna be really, really good for Childress, and tell them they'll have a partner in the governor's office who will work with this community. And we even got the cell phone of the county commissioner. Now we're ready to go. We're working on it. So thank you. Thanks for the question. Yeah.
You mentioned foster care. Tex and I were licensed foster parents for a lot of years. We're adopted parents of a number of kids from Texas from foster care. I guess my first question would be, how do you feel about the increasing privatization of our state system? And just to point out that privatization, like a lot of other things, looks very different out here, up here, than it does in Harris County or Tarrant County. When we privatize everything and we have a social worker with 50 cases, like I did my second year, no, my first year, I had 52 cases before I was done and officially trained. But that covered 350 miles. And I was trying to see those kids, you know. So while some of the privatization, I've seen great things happen, it's also very different because you take away a lot of checks and balances that happen if you are working with a private company and you are the person covering an area like that. Right? You're just not communicating, you're not going back to that office setting, you're not sitting down with your supervisor. And my only other comment about the FPS would be, you heard the teachers throw up a holler about the TEA committee this week not having teachers on it. If, God willing, you are in the governor's seat someday, the FPS is no different. Quit giving foster kids who are aged out of foster care cute positions on committees. Get some of them in the organization. It's like having somebody at TEA who hadn't been in a classroom in 45 years to have somebody who's worked their way up through DFPS and has not seen and sat down across from a child in care in 40 years. It is not effective, and we need social workers at the highest level of the FPS who are closer to the situation, and it's absolutely shameful. I am also half Cherokee, my mom is half Cherokee, so I've done ICWA work for the Indian Child Welfare Act, just helping fill out paperwork in other places. And it's disappointing everywhere, but it is shameful in Texas. We should be ashamed. And our Region 1 goes all the way from the top, all the way down and covers Lubbock. And just in the last few weeks, I've had people have to transport kids for foster care down to Brownsville. And when you're talking about wanting to keep kids with their family, secondary to that, if you can't, goodness, you want to keep them close to their school, close to their community, close to what's familiar to them. And we are driving our kids 10 and 12 hours to place them in other places. And so I'd love to know what your overall top 3 are about DFPS or whatever, but also just as a reminder that so much of that looks different in rural areas than it does in the city as well.
Thank you for sharing that and for what you and Tex are doing. And I was talking earlier about we'll really be defined by how we treat the most vulnerable among us. And I think that speaks so well of you and of this community for what you're doing and the fact that you're raising this issue in this conversation right now. Cynthia, I don't know if you remember the name of the young man who introduced himself to us earlier in Alney. He'd aged out of the foster care system. He went in when he was 11 years old. And he said, look, you're taken from a family where there may be abuse or really bad dysfunction, but then you're taken away from all family members. You're placed with strangers. Was he in Dalhart or Boys Ranch? Boys Ranch. And he said, and then you age out and it's like, good luck. You're 18 years old and you got no family and no connections. And I'm sure you saw this comment from the the judge, Judge Jack, who's been on this for the last 6 years. But 6 years ago, she said these kids emerge, they age out from the system more damaged than when they went into the system. And 6 years later, 2 months ago in January, she said it has gone from bad to worse. It's actually gotten worse over the last 6 years. And look, there's some complicated issues. There's 30,000 kids in that system. I think there's all manner of excuses that people could dream up. But for you to be in the governor's office for these last 6 years and to not have made improvements and only to see it get worse, 23 kids have lost their lives within CPS custody and care in just a 2-year period. We learned about these 7 girls, ages 11 to 17, who were trafficked, then rescued by the state of Texas, placed in privatized care. And we know at a minimum that nude pictures of them were taken by those private employees at that facility. To have been traumatized and trafficked in that way, and then to think that you've been rescued only to be delivered over to others who are going to exploit you, that is the worst of the worst, and we've got to get it better. And I agree with you. I think, if we want to privatize the contractors who build our roads, that makes sense. I don't know that we want to have, a workforce of people on the state payroll who are building roads and bridges and all that stuff. I like that we can work with the business community on that. But privatizing prisons, privatizing schools, privatizing CPS and the care for those kids who cannot stay with their families, that's not right. That's a public responsibility, and you use the right words in my opinion. The oversight and accountability is going to be missing when we're trying to produce profits for people who in some cases are taking advantage of these kids. You asked about ideas to change it. I'll give you mine, and then afterwards I want to listen to yours because you know this better than I ever will. But one, we got to prioritize when we can keeping kids with their families. And you probably know this, there's a federal program called Families First. And like Medicaid, the governor's rejected tens of millions of dollars from the federal government that could be used to create stable conditions within those homes so kids don't have to be taken out in the first place. Second thing I do is pay our CPS caseworkers more and hire more of them. It's kind of like with nurses and with school teachers right now. They're already underpaid, more are leaving the profession, so those who stay are having to do more and more and more, and it's stressing them out as it would me. We were in Abilene in November. We finished an event like this one, and a young CPS caseworker came up, tears in her eyes, and she said, what the conditions I'm seeing are horrifying, but I can't leave, because if I leave, then I've become part of the problem. I'm just gonna stay and do my best. So let's take care of her and other CPS caseworkers and make sure that they can do well. Third thing is an investment in mental health care. So often that is a contributing factor to some of these homes where kids are taken out of. If we get back to Medicaid expansion and even the state of Texas investing in mental health care, we're gonna have improved outcomes for those kids and those families. And last one, we should prioritize kinship when we can. We got to meet a grandmother who, her grandkids were taken from their mother's home, placed in the foster care system, and she was ready and willing to be there for them, had a great home for them, ultimately was able to get them back. And we met them, and they're both amazing, beautiful kids who are 16 and 15 years old, are working jobs, doing great academically, and it just reminded me of how important it is when we can to be able to keep kids with family. And then last thing, support folks like you who are willing to step up and do what so many of us have not been willing to do. We need to make sure you have every resource that you need to ensure that you're successful and those kids are successful. I cannot thank you enough for bringing this up, because I think part of the reason CPS has gotten so bad is those kids don't make political campaign contributions. There's no lobby or advocacy group that's getting in the face of those state legislators or the governor and say, hey, you better look out for these kids. They're really kind of left to their own defense unless someone like you will step up and advocate for them. So thank you for doing this, and know it is a priority for me, and I'll make sure after we finish that I have a chance to just listen to you, and then you tell me the things that we need to change in addition to those that I offered, because you understand this really well. Thank you. Sir?
Mr. Beto?
Yes.
How are we gonna get the people back to work, locally, a small town? We've got a lot of people out of work here that we're struggling. Myself is one, struggling to hire help locally. All of our retail convenience stores, such, Walmart, and such another, struggling to get employees to come back to work. I don't know what they're doing for money. Evidently, I don't know. They may be on welfare, I'm not sure. But how do we get employees back to work so we can pay for the programs to do what you wanna do with our community to help children, whatever we need to do? How are we gonna get people back to work? That's what I need to know, Lisa.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's make sure that the people who are graduating from our schools are college ready and or career ready. Right now, because we haven't been making those investments in public education, you have folks who are 18 years old who are going into the workforce who very often need remedial education, or who go to community college and have to take remedial courses because we haven't made the investment in them when they're going through the K through 12 process. So that's a good place to start, to make sure that young people are actually competitive for these positions. I also want to make sure that we help the small mom and pop businesses in these communities. I mean, I have nothing against Walmart. I want them to be successful, but someone who was born and raised here in Childress, who's taken the risk to start a business, I want them to be successful. I want the state of Texas to be their partner. So often we're throwing subsidies at these large corporations who already make billions and don't need the additional assistance. Let's make sure that we're helping out local small business owners. If that means, in part to answer your question, that we make it easier to get loans and to finance those loans, to expand your business, to hire more people, let's do that. And let's make sure that we fully come out of this recession in a full recovery. And then I mentioned internet earlier. A lot of rural Texas is having a hard time getting online. About 50% cannot access the internet. So making an investment in that kind of infrastructure makes it easier for people to look for a job, makes it easier for people to create jobs by starting businesses, for farmers and ranchers to get what they grow and produce to market. We need to be on the internet right now. So as governor, I want to make those investments in these rural communities. And then last thing, I think we learned this from the pandemic. If you have a good quality of life, if your community is affordable, and if you have access to the internet, you can have workers who can do their job from your community and deliver whatever they're doing almost anywhere, right? Our kids learned at a distance. Many of us were able to do our jobs at a distance. Not everyone, but a lot of people. This is a beautiful community. This is a place we should be attracting talent, or talent back from other places who've left here, and say, look, it's affordable to live here. These are the folks who helped raise you and invested in your success. We now have high-speed internet, quality of life that should draw you back, and you can do your job right from here. That's a pitch that I'd love to be part of as governor. And then again, as I answered the CPS question, I'd also love to hear your ideas on how we can do a better job for Childress. Thank you for asking. Appreciate it.
Appreciate it.
All right, Cynthia's saying that was our last question. Thank you again for organizing this, for hosting us here today, and to each of you for coming out. We really enjoyed it. And for anyone who'd like to say hello afterwards, Amy, Henry, and I will stick around for a little while. And we'd also love to beg you to take a picture with us and post that online. I'll tell you what, it is amazing how many people we have reached by folks who come to meetings like these, posting a picture on Facebook or Instagram, or we'll even dance with you on TikTok if you want to do that. Whatever it takes to reach people and let them know that there's someone who wants to serve them here in this community, and that we actually showed up in Childress. I think that's going to go a long way. So thanks for having us out. We really appreciate it. Gracias. Thank you.